welcome to my review for the 1972 film Horror Express, starring Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. It's not a Hammer film though, this. It was a Spanish production. It was directed by a guy called Eugenio Martin, who changed his name to Gene Martin just for this film. I don't know why. I think Eugenio Martin is a much cooler sounding name personally. I first saw this in the 90s as a teenager. It was on TV one night and I really enjoyed it. It's taken me 25 years to go back to it again. I think the reason I have is because I've been watching a lot of train horror films recently, like Deathline and Terror Train, so I thought of this one. I went out and bought the Blu-ray. It's an Arrow release. It's very, very good restoration, lots of decent features on it. So the story sees Christopher Lee's scientist character Alexander Saxton discover some half-human, half-ape remains in the Chinese mountains, and he's very excited about this because he thinks these remains might be 2 million years old. So he puts them in a crate, locks it up, and dumps it on a train which is going to be travelling all the way through Russia. Presumably the end goal is to get this crate to England, this being an English character. But once the train gets going, the remains spring to life again. It turns out they are neither human or ape. It's actually an alien, this thing, and it's not dead. So the characters on board are in big trouble because the majority of this story takes place while the train is passing through its Siberia leg of the journey. At some point, you've probably seen at least one film where some disgruntled FBI director said to his young charge, "Collins, you mess up again, and I'll have you posted to Siberia." Well, in this film, we get to see why that is such a horrible prospect for any young FBI or CIA agent, because Siberia is just a snowy wasteland, it seems, with very little civilization. So it's a real bottleneck situation that Saxton and his fellow passengers find themselves in. There will definitely be horror on this express. So let's talk a bit more about the alien then. There will be spoilers from this point forwards. This is definitely the most far-fetched alien concept I've ever seen in a movie. That doesn't mean that it's a bad movie. I quite like it, but you've definitely got to leave your brain at the door going in. If you find yourself being really hypercritical about all the unlikely capabilities the alien possesses in this film, you're probably going to be disappointed. So, for example, the way that it kills people, it just stares people to death with its red eyes. And that's not the worst part. While it's killing them with its stare, it can absorb their skills, knowledge and experience through the air into its own brain and then use that stuff going forwards. So I'll give you a non-spoiler example. Let's say the alien killed a world-class tennis player, Roger Federer. So at the same time it would be killing poor Federer with its stare, it would also be absorbing his tennis skills into its brain. So from that point onwards, the alien would be able to play world-class tennis like Roger Federer, even though it looks like a giant hairy ape thing. Also, if the alien finds itself cornered or dying, it can just look around, spot a perfectly healthy human and will itself into that human, take over its body, just like that, just by thinking it, just by willing it. And I've not even got yet to the magical zombie army that the alien can just will to life by thinking about it when it's in a tight situation. It does feel at times like it's making its own rules up. If at any point this alien had just decided that it had a ray gun in its elbow, I wouldn't have felt that that was out of place for this movie. And yet, I never felt cheated at any point. And I think the reason for that is because the revelations as to what the alien can do are quite spaced out. It was only really after the film, when I sort of sat down to think about it, that, yeah, it did occur to me there are lots of crazy, unrealistic things in this film. But it's not a black comedy. It's played totally straight. It's a serious horror film, but it is very sci-fi. It's almost as if its origins are from some kind of 1950s comic book or something. But if you just let yourself go and accept that there will be some craziness, some illogical stuff, you'll have a good time. Christopher Lee Saxton is a very grumpy, unimaginative sort. He's the type of character who would normally get killed off halfway through something like this. I suspect most people will only like him because it's Lee playing the part. Peter Cushing plays an English doctor who just happens to be getting on a train at the arse end of the Far East on the same day as Lee. But it's a very multinational group of passengers, this. It's not just a group of Russians and Lee and Cushing. It's a very transatlantic passenger manifesto. And part of the fun of the movie is seeing such a diverse group of people having to interact with each other in order to survive the aliens' attack. So there's this one woman, I think she's German. It turns out she's a spy, and she's got the ulterior motive of being on this train to try and get into a certain safe, but she totally picked the wrong day for it. There's also this really old Russian count who walks around in a pink dressing gown. He reminds me of the Jeff Goldblum character from Thor Ragnarok, at least in terms of how he looks. He's got this Russian countess with him who's like 50 years his junior. I'm not sure if they're meant to be lovers or not. I don't want to think about it. Then there's this weird monk character who's like the harbinger of doom. He takes one look at the crate on the platform at the start of the movie and that's it. He knows everybody's doomed. And I've not even got to Telly Savalas yet, the third big star of the film. He plays an obnoxious Russian soldier who's just there to sort of wind everybody up and act the bully. One thing I noticed is that there's hardly any young people on the train. I don't think there's anybody under the age of 30, apart from maybe the Countess. It's really weird nowadays watching a horror film where the two main stars are in their 50s and 60s. It just wouldn't happen now. I don't think Lee and Cushing became really famous until they were north of 40. So if they'd been around now instead of back then, sure, they could have been in horror films, but I don't think they would have been horror stars. There's a very high body count in this. It feels like somebody's dying every 5 minutes. And yeah, I keep going back to this notion of sci-fi. This definitely feels like a science fiction film with strong horror elements in it, rather than a horror film with bits of sci-fi in it. So I think the title Horror Express might be a little bit misleading, although if the film had been called Sci-Fi Express, I probably wouldn't have reviewed it. Originally, it was meant to have been called Panic on the Trans-Siberian Express, but it got changed at the last minute. The guy in the audio commentary reckons this might have been because that title would have made it sound too much like a disaster film. Although personally, I can't think of anything more disastrous than being trapped on a train with an alien that can mind suck you to death. The ending is completely crazy. If you don't want to know how the alien gets taken out, then look away now. So just when it appears that all hope is lost and the alien with its zombie army is about to sweep through the carriages and kill everyone, we're getting to a patch of ground where there just happens to be a bit of track that leads to a ravine. So to cut a long story short, the characters managed to get the track switched so that the part of the train with the alien on it and all its cohorts veers off into the ravine. Now just think about this for a second. By this point of the story, this train has travelled hundreds of miles through Siberia, and just when the good guys need it, there's this random bit of track that veers off to a ravine. It makes absolutely no sense why this bit of track even exists. It's completely ridiculous when you think about it. But the crash bang wallop of the train going into the ravine is really impressive. There's lots of explosions and smoke. This is the most obvious part of the film where we realise we're not watching a Hammer film. There's a good use of miniatures here. Earlier on in the film, there's some other good miniatures where we just see the train randomly going through the snow. I can't tell what's a real train or a miniature at any point. There's a weird scene where Christopher Lee is coming from the back of the train and then he veers off into a cabin to talk to somebody. And I think they've got the back projection wrong through the window, because based on what I knew of the geography of the train at this point, I think the train should have been going in the opposite direction to what it is, but I can't be exactly sure about that. If I had to name any proper negatives about the film, I'd probably say the lack of an epilogue bothered me a little bit. I would have liked to have seen the Lee and Cushing characters having one last chat at Moscow airport, just telling each other what they've learned from their experience and what they're planning to do for the future, rather than just having them look over the side of the ravine at all the debris and boom, cut to credits. Incidentally, speaking of the credits, there's some really weird music that plays to close out this film. It's more like the sort of thing you'd hear at the end of a Mediterranean police drama. It's definitely the Spanishness of the production coming to the fore, but it did put a smile on my face. I had a smile on my face for this whole film, really. I did enjoy it despite its silliness. Now, at times, I can be rubbed up the wrong way by films that are too unrealistic and stretch credibility, but this one wasn't one of those times. I think the fact that this is a film from my childhood helped towards me feeling that way. I'm not sure if I'd recommend this to everybody. You have to sort of appreciate really offbeat stuff. If you're a fan of John Carpenter's The Thing, you might like this, with all the kind of body swapping that the alien does. And you'd have to have some kind of appreciation of old films. This came out in '72, long time ago now. But maybe check out the trailer and see what you think, if you're wondering whether you might like to try this one. Right, so let's get to the bag of terror and see what sort of score we've got for Horror Express. One, two, three. 3.5 bloody axes for Horror Express. That's a decent-ish score, so I guess that concludes my recent trilogy of horror films on trains. I had Terror Train, I did Deathline, and I've done this. I don't have any more of this kind of thing coming up soon, but who knows what I will seek out very shortly. Right, until next time, cheerio, bye-bye. Given the fact that I have already marked Russia, I'm going to go for China. The film did start off in China. There we go.